generation of these progressives. Now, where did these progressives get their ideas from? Well, Dewey was very sympathetic to the communist revolution in the early part of the last century. Now, as it came to take power over a course of time, it became obviously openly genocidal. Then they try to step back from it. There was Walter Weil, 1873 to 1919. And he wrote a book that was famous back then called The New Democracy. Had an enormous effect, trashing the Declaration and the Constitution. It's important to understand this, in my opinion. The pivot point already took place. The problem is the modern Democrat Party is the bastard child of this ideology. Now, where did these men get their ideas from? They didn't just create them. They got their ideas from Karl Marx. They were familiar with Karl Marx. They got their ideas from Hegel. No, not the idiot who was Secretary of Defense under Obama. No, Hegel, who basically wrote excuses for Prussia and the empire there, thinking that, basically the community is where each and every one of us get our fulfillment. And Marx thought Hegel was brilliant, but he took it one step further, and Hegel talked about historicism. I'm not going to get too much in the weeds. And Marx talked about material historicism. He saw everything as a factor of a reaction to materialism. Hegel had a different approach. And this is where they get their ideas from. They may not know this is where they get their ideas from, but they embrace them. Now, these are alien concepts. These are alien ideologies that have been imported into the United States by a small minority of intellectuals who were reacting against the Industrial Revolution. They were attacking capitalism, just as many populists do today. And the leftists, of course, attacking capitalism. They were attacking private property rights. They were attacking individualism. Liberty and individualism can only be really experienced through the community, through the better good, through the government. Everybody going in their own direction, that's problematic. And now you can see why they are control freaks. You had Rousseau. Rousseau contended that the way around the desolation of the individual is through the state. He was a very, in some ways, mentally sick man, and I don't say that to be pejorative. I'm saying it because he was. It's not enough to say, to criticize, not enough to say to the citizens, be good. They must taught to be good. Love of country is the most effective, for as I have already said, every man is virtuous when his private will is in conformity with the general will, in all things. In all things. Well, that's a police state, isn't it? It comes to government. Rousseau argued that the legislative power belongs to the people, but the supreme administration, or the executive, which carries out governmental administration, does not belong to the people, for its task, albeit important, is nothing more than ministerial. In other words, you go over there, you live over here, you get that benefit, you have to remove this, that's just a ministerial task. Legislature and no legislature. Right? These things can be complicated, but they're fascinating too. But if you understand them, you understand what's happening to your country. Hegel lived from 1770 to 18... Am I boring everyone, Mr. Producer? He lived from 1870 to 1831. Great sway over Marx and Engels. And American progressives, Crowley, Wilson, Dewey, Weil, others. And he provided the most detailed exposition of what was known in the period as German idealism. Now, Mr. O'Dork may not know that he is promoting German idealism. You and I want the promotion of Americanism. And he was prolific, enormously influential, particularly with the Prussian oligarchy, monarchy. And he's legendary for, among other things, developing the philosophy of historical progress. So just let me give you a very thumbnail sketch on this. He argued that he is not inventing a new philosophy, but describing existing reality. Isn't that clever? Look, I'm not describing a philosophy. I'm just telling you what's happening. It's a matter of history, and there's no way to stop it. It's the progression of history. Now, what's fascinating about this, on the one hand, they argue about the progression of history, and on the other hand, they reject history. Because knowing what happened in the past is of no consequence, they argue. So the history of the world is said to be progress toward conscious freedom and a state of harmony. Conscious freedom for the people as a whole, a state of harmony for the people as a whole. Some societies are stuck in their own history. Now listen, doesn't this sound like Beto O'Rourke? Some societies are stuck in their own history, he wrote. And others progress over time. But the trajectory of history, generally, is toward the ideal state. The Ameritopia. The ideal state. The method of individual and societal progress involves a dialectic process. Some reasoned, some unconscious, in which opposites are in a constant state of conflict, synthesizing into ever higher truths. This is me summarizing, which eventually lead to a fully developed state. The final end is what Hegel called it, the final end. That which appears irrational in a state will eventually be brought into harmony. And this, contended Hegel, is the fact of human history and evolution. The state, which is the realized substantive will of the people, having its reality in the particular self-consciousness raised to the plane of the universal, is absolutely rational. This is Hegel. This substantive unity is its own motive, an absolute end. In this end, freedom attains its highest right. This end has the highest right over the individual, whose highest duty, in turn, is to be a member of the state. So the individual is again subservient to the state, even though they talk about the people. For the state can never attain the lofty utopian heights devised by Hegel, and the individual will never be adequate to the cause. Meanwhile, the individual's independence and free will are absorbed by the state in the name of community and the general welfare. And I go on, and I won't go on now. So this pivot point, ladies and gentlemen, didn't occur with Beto O'Rourke in the Washington Post interview. Maybe it's his pivot point, that is O'Rourke's. This is the ideology, and there's much more to it. This is the ideology that is embraced by the progressives. And this is the ideology that's being imposed upon you by unelected branches and elected branches at the same time. So you can understand how furious they are. Whether they actually understand their history or not is inconsequential. It's important that you understand it. This is why they hate Trump. This is why they hated Reagan. Frankly, this is why they hated Nixon. You're getting in the way, ladies and gentlemen, with your votes. You're getting in the way of the perfect society. You're getting in the way of the perfection of the human being. Forget about God. Forget about the Founding Fathers. Forget about these old dusty documents. That was then. This is now. We're realists. We're rationalists. We believe in modernity. History is only useful to the extent we know what we're changing from. We can't learn much from history. So this old Constitution, with separation of powers and limited government, and a weak judiciary, it doesn't work. And just as a revolution was fought, a declaration was, proclaimed, the Constitution was eventually settled on, that was that generation. That was a Revolutionary War generation. We're our generation, as they put it. 230 some years later. And we get to decide what kind of life we want to live under what kind of government and circumstances. Founding government, no founding government, it's inconsequential. The phrase that O'Dork used in that interview, the most important phrase was sweeping change. Sweeping changes. The way the government works, we can't make sweeping changes. That's what should be frightening, because that's what they're all about. Unmoored from the Constitution, making sweeping changes. And this is all old stuff, folks. One society after another, human beings have experienced hell, poverty on earth. Hell, poverty on earth with this ideology. It's got different tributaries, but it's essentially the same. That's what progressivism is. That's what Beto O'Dork believes in. That's what Nancy Pelosi believes in. That's what Schmucky Schumer believes in. Whether or not they understand the philosophers behind it or the intellectuals behind it, that's where they're driving us. That's why they question the Constitution. They wave it around. They swear to uphold it. They have no intention of upholding it. I'll be right back.
Mark Levin.